I once said on here that fascists always think they're on the right side of history until the textbooks are written. I've also said that people who support this administration in the future will deny they ever did. And they'll say things like hindsight is 2020 and things were different when you were living in the moment. So fortunately enough for you guys, I don't have any patience to wait until that time comes. And I took the liberty of drafting up something future generations, your children, will be reading about this moment in time. And mind you, this is just news from the past month and a half. Federal enforcement and civilian deaths. The killing of Keith Porter Jr., Renee Good, and Alex Preddy by federal agents became defining moments of public reckoning. The deaths occurred during the enforcement encounters that officials initially described as routine and necessary. Subsequent investigations and eyewitness accounts, however, raised serious questions about the proportional use of force and the lack of immediate accountability. As with earlier episodes of state violence against marginalized communities, the initial institutional response emphasized justification rather than introspection. Public outrage followed, not only because lives were lost, but because those losses were treated as administrative outcomes rather than human tragedies. In retrospect, historians identify these incidents as emblematic of an era in which enforcement objectives were permitted to override fundamental respect for life. The mass detention of immigrant laborers. At the same time, large numbers of immigrants, many of whom had lived and worked in the United States for years, were detained in sweeping operations that prioritized numerical success over individual assessment. These actions disrupted families, workplaces, and entire communities. Later, scholars drew direct comparisons between these detentions and earlier periods of American history, in which entire groups were targeted not for their actions, but for their identity. As in the past, legality was invoked to justify practices that would later be understood as morally indefensible. The language of law and order once again masked human suffering. Radical dehumanization in presidential rhetoric. The period was further marked by the normalization of radicalized dehumanization at the highest levels of political power. When the sitting president circulated imagery portraying African-American former President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama as animals. The act echoed a long history of racist propaganda used to legitimize exclusion and violence. Though defenders attempted to dismiss the incident as satire, historians emphasized that such imagery did not exist in a vacuum. Dehumanization has historically preceded repression, and the repetition of these tropes from the executive branch signaled a profound erosion of democratic norms. The episode is now taught alongside earlier examples of state-sanctioned racial contempt as a warning about the dangers of trivializing hate. Cultural segregation and political identity. Even national current events were not immune to the era's divisions. When a major sporting event's halftime performance celebrated Latino culture and language, organized political groups responded by creating a parallel event framed explicitly around exclusionary definitions of American identity. This deliberate cultural separation mirrored older strategies used to resist integration during the civil rights era, when shared with public spaces became battlegrounds for ideological control. Historians note that the issue was never the music itself, but the assertion that certain cultures belonged at the center of American life, while others did not. Historical assessment. With distance, scholars now understand the mid-2020s as a moment when the United States once again tested the boundaries of its professed values. The deaths, detentions, and degradations of this period are no longer debated as isolated incidents, but examined collectively as evidence of systemic failure. As with earlier dark chapters in American history, contemporary justifications have not endured. What remains is the record of harm and the lesson that democratic institutions do not erode suddenly, but gradually, when injustice is tolerated in the name of order.